It was a calm evening in our suburban neighborhood, the kind of night where you could hear the crickets chirping and see the stars clearly in the sky. I was on duty, patrolling the usual areas, when the call came in. A missing child. My heart sank, as it always did with these calls. Missing children often meant frantic parents and a ticking clock. The park was just a few blocks away from where I was. As I approached, the scene was almost picturesque. A well-kept playground, with swings gently swaying in the breeze, slides glinting under the streetlights, and the surrounding woods casting long shadows. But the tranquility was shattered by the sight of a distraught couple huddled together, their faces pale with fear. I stepped out of the car, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The father, John, was trying to stay composed while the mother, Gianna, clung to him, tears streaming down her face. Our daughter, Sophia, she's gone. We were just here, playing hide and seek. She was there one moment, and then nothing. We began our search, calling out Sophia's name, our voices echoing eerily in the night. Other officers arrived, and we fanned out across the park. The swings creaked, a lonely sound against the backdrop of our urgent calls. The playground, once a place of laughter, now felt sinister. The park bordered a dense forest. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from the shadows. The first hour passed without any sign of Sophia. Anxiety gnawed at me as I moved deeper into the woods, the trees closing in around me, their branches like skeletal hands reaching out in the darkness. I kept my mind occupied by focusing on the task at hand, thinking of my own kids and how I would feel in John and Gianna's place. The thought of a child alone, scared in the dark, propelled me forward. My heart pounded with each step, and the beam of my flashlight seemed feeble against the oppressive blackness of the forest. Just as my hope was beginning to wane, I spotted something glinting in the underbrush. It was Sophia's hairpin, a small butterfly-shaped clip that sparkled under the flashlight. My pulse quickened. "Sophia," I called out, my voice cracking. Then, I heard it, a soft rustling sound. It wasn't the wind, it was deliberate. I swung my flashlight towards the noise, and there, half hidden behind a tree, was a figure. For a moment my heart leapt, thinking it was Sophia. But as the light fell fully on it, I saw it was not a child. The figure was gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through me. It moved silently, gliding almost, disappearing behind another tree. I shouted for my colleagues, but when they arrived, there was no trace of the figure. We pressed on, but every few minutes, I caught glimpses of it, always just out of reach, always watching. The woods felt alive with whispers and movements just beyond our sight. It wasn't long before other officers started reporting similar sightings. An uneasy feeling settled over us, a collective shiver down our spines. Hours passed, and we regrouped at the edge of the woods, exhausted and no closer to finding Sophia. The night was at its darkest, and the sense of isolation was overwhelming. We decided to conduct one last sweep. I paired up with another officer, hoping our combined presence would ward off the creeping dread. We ventured back into the woods, calling out for Sophia. The silence was deafening, our own footsteps echoing back at us. Suddenly, we heard a soft whimper. Following the sound, we found Sophia, huddled and shivering, but unharmed. She looked at us with wide, terrified eyes and pointed into the darkness. The man, he was here. We carried her back to her parents, their relief palpable. But as we left the park, I glanced back at the forest. The figure stood there watching us, and then vanished into the shadows. We never found out who or what it was, and that mystery haunts me to this day. Back at the station, the story spread quickly. Other officers shared similar eerie encounters from different cases, and the once skeptical became believers. The forest, once a playground for the children, became a place of whispered fears and avoided paths. That night left a mark on all of us. Sophia was safe, but the sense of something lurking in the woods, watching and waiting, stayed with us. It was a reminder that sometimes the real horrors are not what we can see, but what hides in the darkness, just out of reach. My shift started like any other, with the usual chatter among the officers as we gathered for the nightly briefing. I was partnered with Officer Davis, a seasoned cop with a stoic demeanor. Tonight, we had been assigned to check out an old mental asylum on the outskirts of town. It had been abandoned for decades, but recently there had been reports of strange noises and lights coming from the building. Some claimed to have seen figures moving through the windows. The asylum loomed ahead as we drove up the winding road, its silhouette stark against the moonlit sky. The building was massive, with crumbling walls and boarded-up windows. Ivy had taken over much of the exterior, giving it a wild, untamed look. The entrance gate was rusted and barely hanging on its hinges, creaking eerily as we pushed it open. The air was thick with an unsettling silence as we approached the main door. Davis and I exchanged uneasy glances. "Just another night on the job," he muttered, but I could sense the tension in his voice. Inside, the asylum was a labyrinth of long, dark corridors and empty rooms. Our flashlights barely penetrated the darkness, revealing only glimpses of peeling wallpaper, broken furniture, and the occasional graffiti. The smell of mildew and decay hung heavy in the air. We began our sweep, room by room, our footsteps echoing in the silence. Each creak of the floorboards and distant drip of water made my heart race a little faster. It felt as if the building itself was watching us, waiting for something. Davis and I joked to ease the tension, talking about the ghost stories we had heard growing up. But underneath the banter, there was a palpable sense of dread. My mind kept wandering to the stories of patients who had suffered here, their spirits supposedly still haunting the halls. We reached the first floor and started down a corridor lined with old patient rooms. Each door we opened revealed more decay, more shadows. Suddenly, we heard a faint sound like a whisper coming from further down the hall. We froze, listening intently. "Did you hear that?" Davis asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, gripping my flashlight tighter. As we moved closer to the source of the sound, the whispering grew louder, more distinct. It seemed to be coming from one of the rooms. We approached cautiously, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The door to the room was slightly ajar. Davis pushed it open, and we stepped inside. The room was empty, save for an old wheelchair in the corner. The whispering stopped abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. I felt a chill run down my spine. Maybe it was just the wind, I suggested, though I didn't believe it myself. We continued our search, but now I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every so often I caught glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, shadows that seemed to dart just out of sight. Davis noticed it too. "Stay sharp," he warned, his voice tense. As we reached the second floor, the atmosphere grew even more oppressive. The air was colder, and the darkness seemed to press in around us. We entered a large room that looked like it had once been a common area for patients. The walls were covered in faded murals, depicting scenes that were now barely recognizable. We were halfway across the room when we heard it again, a whisper, this time clearer, almost like a voice. "Help me." It was coming from the far corner of the room. We both turned our flashlights towards the sound, but there was nothing there. The feeling of isolation was overwhelming. We were alone in this vast, decaying building, with only the sound of our own breathing to break the silence. The whispers grew more frequent, more urgent. It felt as if they were coming from all around us, echoing off the walls. We pressed on, determined to get to the bottom of whatever was happening here. In one of the rooms, we found some handwritings on the walls, detailing the horrible treatments they had endured. The last phrase was chilling. "They come at night. The voices. They won't let me sleep." As we reached the third floor, the whispers turned into faint cries, almost like the wailing of lost souls. We found ourselves in what appeared to be the infirmary. Rusty beds were lined up against the walls, and old medical equipment lay scattered on the floor. The air was so cold I could see my breath. We heard a loud crash from one of the adjacent rooms. Rushing towards the sound, we found an old metal bed frame had fallen over. There was no one there. "This place is getting to me," Davis admitted, his usual stoic demeanor cracking. Suddenly, the temperature plummeted even further, and the lights on our flashlights flickered. I felt a hand on my shoulder, but when I turned around, there was no one there. Davis and I stood back to back, our flashlights sweeping the room. We both saw it at the same time, a figure standing at the end of the hallway, partially obscured by shadows. It was tall, with an unsettling, elongated silhouette. It didn't move, just stood there, watching us. My heart pounded in my chest. "Let's get out of here," Davis said. and I couldn't agree more. We backed away slowly, not taking our eyes off the figure. It remained motionless. But the whispers grew louder, filling the hallway with a cacophony of voices. We turned and ran, our footsteps echoing through the empty halls. As we reached the entrance, the whispers stopped. We burst out into the night, gasping for breath. The cold air outside felt like a relief after the oppressive atmosphere inside the asylum. We drove back to the station in silence, both of us trying to process what we had experienced. The old asylum was sealed off after that night, declared too dangerous for anyone to enter. But the whispers and the figure we saw still haunt me. I've been on many calls in my career, but nothing has ever shaken me like that night in the old asylum. Some places are just wrong, and the asylum is one of them. The mystery of what we encountered there remains unsolved, a chilling reminder that some things are beyond our understanding. Another night shift, another long drive along the rural roads that crisscross our county. It was just past midnight when the call came in. An abandoned car had been spotted on a remote stretch of road, miles from the nearest town. Dispatch had received a report from a passing driver who mentioned that the car looked like it had been there for a while, with no signs of its owner. I was partnered with Officer Rodriguez, a seasoned cop known for his cool head and sharp instincts. We exchanged a knowing glance as we headed out, the darkness of the rural roads stretching out before us like a black ribbon under the moonlit sky. The road was narrow, flanked by dense woods on either side. The only sounds were the hum of our cruiser's engine and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. As we drove, the beam of our headlights sliced through the darkness, casting eerie shadows on the road. After what felt like an eternity, we spotted the car. It was an old sedan parked awkwardly on the side of the road, its front end dipped into a shallow ditch. The car's headlights were off, but the interior light was faintly glowing, casting a dim illumination over the empty seats. I met Rodriguez and I parked a few yards behind the car and approached cautiously, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The night was still, almost unnaturally so, and I felt a chill creep up my spine. We circled the car, our flashlights revealing the details. The windows were slightly fogged, and there were muddy footprints around the vehicle. The doors were unlocked, and I gently opened the driver's side door, half expecting to find someone slumped over the wheel. But the car was empty. The interior was cluttered with personal items, a purse on the passenger seat, a phone charger dangling from the dashboard, and a half-empty water bottle in the cup holder. It looked like someone had left in a hurry. "Let's check the surrounding area," Rodriguez suggested, his voice low. I nodded, feeling a growing unease. We moved towards the woods, our flashlights sweeping the dense underbrush. The darkness seemed to press in around us, and every rustle of leaves made my heart skip a beat. We called out, identifying ourselves as police officers, but the only response was the distant hoot of an owl. My mind raced with possibilities, an accident, a lost driver, or something more sinister. The isolation of the setting made the situation even more unnerving. Rodriguez and I split up to cover more ground. As I moved deeper into the woods, the beam of my flashlight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the trees. I called out again, but the silence was oppressive, as if the woods themselves were swallowing my voice. Suddenly, I heard a faint noise, like a whisper carried on the wind. I froze, straining to hear. The whisper came again, more distinct this time, a voice, barely audible, but unmistakably human. My heart pounded as I followed the sound, my flashlight flickering sporadically. The whisper led me to a small clearing, where I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, just within the range of my flashlight's beam. It was a woman, her clothes torn and dirty, her eyes wide with terror. She was whispering frantically, her words a jumbled mess. "Ma'am, are you okay?" I called out, moving closer, but as I approached, she turned and ran into the woods, disappearing into the darkness. I called out to her, but she didn't respond. I radioed Rodriguez, telling him what I had seen, and he quickly joined me. We combed the area, but the woman was nowhere to be found. The whispering, however, persisted, echoing through the trees like a ghostly chorus. It felt as if the woods were alive, watching us, mocking our attempts to find her. As the night wore on, the whispering grew louder, more insistent. Rodriguez and I returned to the car, hoping to find some clue that could explain what was happening. We searched the vehicle again, and this time we found something chilling, a note tucked under the driver's seat. The note was scribbled hastily, the words barely legible, "They're here. Don't let them find you. Run." The fear in the writing was palpable, and it sent a shiver down my spine. The isolation of the setting was overwhelming. We were miles from the nearest town, alone in the dark with only our flashlights and radios for company. The sense of vulnerability was intense, amplified by the eerie atmosphere of the woods and the persistent whispers. We decided to expand our search, moving further into the forest. The darkness was suffocating, and every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made my heart race. The whispers seemed to follow us, growing louder and more frantic with each step. We never found the woman. The whispering eventually faded, leaving us alone in the oppressive silence of the woods. We returned to the car, baffled and unnerved by the night's events. There was no sign of what had happened to her, no clue as to why she had fled or what she had been running from. Alice and I drove back to the station in silence, both of us lost in our thoughts. The abandoned car was towed away, but the mystery of that night lingered, a haunting reminder of the things we couldn't explain. Back at the station, we filed our report, detailing the strange events of the night. Our fellow officers listened with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Some suggested that the woman had been involved in some criminal activity, while others speculated about more supernatural explanations. Whatever the truth, that night left an indelible mark on both Rodriguez and me. The whispers, the mysterious woman, the eerie atmosphere of the woods, all of it combined to create an experience that was both terrifying and inexplicable. It was a stark reminder that in our line of work, we must be prepared for anything, even the unexplainable. It was a quiet night in the precinct when the call came in. I was sitting at my desk, sipping on my third cup of coffee and idly browsing through paperwork. The clock on the wall ticked past 2 a.m., and the atmosphere in the station was calm, almost eerily so. Then the phone rang. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the receiver. "We have a situation at the old Windermere estate. Caller reported strange noises and sightings. It's been abandoned for years, so we're not sure what's going on. Can you check it out?" I glanced over at my partner, Officer Bennett, who was reading a magazine across the room. "We got a call," I said, grabbing my jacket. "Windermere Estate. Apparently someone's seeing things." Bennett rolled his eyes but stood up, stretching. "All right, let's go." The drive to the Windermere Estate was uneventful, the streets empty and bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. As we left the town behind, the road grew narrower, and the trees on either side seemed to close in around us. The estate was a few miles out, a relic of a bygone era, long since abandoned and rumored to be haunted. We pulled up to the iron gates, which stood ajar, creaking softly in the wind. The mansion loomed in the distance, a hulking silhouette against the moonlit sky. Its windows were dark and lifeless, and the once grand facade was now crumbling and overgrown with ivy. "Creepy place," Bennett muttered as we got out of the car. I nodded, feeling a chill despite the mild night air. We approached the mansion cautiously, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The front door was slightly open, and a cold draft greeted us as we stepped inside. The interior was a mess of dust and decay, with broken furniture strewn about and cobwebs hanging from the ceiling. Dispatch said the caller reported noises and sightings. I reminded Bennett as we moved deeper into the house, "Let's split up and see if we can find anything." We separated, Bennett heading upstairs while I explored the ground floor. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards. I checked each room methodically, finding nothing but empty spaces and shadows. In one of the rooms, I found an old piano, its keys yellowed and cracked. I ran my fingers over them, producing a discordant melody that echoed through the house. It was a stark reminder of the life that had once filled these halls, now replaced by emptiness and decay. A sudden noise made me jump, a faint rustling coming from the direction of the kitchen. My heart pounded as I moved towards the sound, flashlight in hand. As I entered the kitchen, the light flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. There was no response, only the continued rustling, like someone or something moving through the room. The source of the noise became apparent as I rounded the corner. A small figure was crouched by the old rusted sink, its back to me. It was dressed in tattered clothes, its hair matted and dirty. My flashlight flickered again, and in that brief moment of darkness, the figure vanished. I froze, my mind racing. I had seen it, hadn't I? A person, right there, just seconds ago. I scanned the room, but there was no sign of anyone. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as I backed out of the kitchen, my heart hammering in my chest. I radioed Bennett, my voice unsteady. I think I saw something in the kitchen. Be careful. As I continued my search, the atmosphere grew heavier, more oppressive. The wind outside picked up, causing the old house to groan and creak. I heard footsteps behind me and spun around, but there was no one there. My flashlight beam danced over the walls, illuminating nothing but dust and shadows. Upstairs, I heard Bennett call out, "Hey, I think I found something. Come up here." I hurried to the staircase, my nerves on edge. As I climbed, I felt a cold breeze, even though the windows were closed. Bennett was standing in a small bedroom, staring at a large ornate mirror on the wall. "Look at this," he said, pointing to the mirror. It was cracked and dusty, but as I approached, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Reflected in the glass was a figure standing behind me, a woman, her face pale and eyes wide with terror. I whipped around, but the hallway behind me was empty. I turned back to the mirror, but the figure was gone. Bennett looked at me, his expression as shaken as I felt. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Bennett nodded, his face pale. "What the hell is going on here?" We decided to stick together from that point on, the eerie encounters having unnerved us both. As we explored the rest of the house, the sense of being watched grew stronger. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind felt charged with malevolent energy. In one of the larger rooms, we found a stack of old photographs and letters, remnants of the family that had once lived here. The photos were faded and yellowed, showing happy faces and moments frozen in time. One letter caught my eye. It was addressed to a woman named Eleanor, pleading for her to leave the house. We took the letter and the photographs, hoping they might offer some clues. As we prepared to leave, the front door slammed shut with a loud bang, the sound echoing through the empty halls. We rushed to the door, but it was stuck, as if held shut by an invisible force. A cold draft blew through the house, carrying with it faint whispers. We stood there, listening, trying to make sense of the words. They were indistinct, like voices carried from a great distance, but the urgency in them was clear. Finally, the door released, and we stumbled out into the night, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as we left the house behind. We drove back to the station in silence, both of us deep in thought. Back at the precinct, we shared our findings with the rest of the team. The photos and letters were examined, but they offered no clear answers. The house remained a mystery, its secrets buried in its decaying walls. The experience left a mark on both Bennett and me. We had faced something that night, something we couldn't explain. It was a reminder of the strange and unexplainable things that lurk in the shadows, waiting to be discovered. Even now, when I drive past the old Windermere estate, I can feel its presence, a dark blot on the landscape. The whispers, the ghostly figure, the oppressive atmosphere, they haunt my memories. If these stories sent a chill down your spine, hit that like button and make sure to subscribe for more horror stories that'll keep you up at night. Don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss out on the next terrifying tale. Stay safe out there, and remember, not everything is as it seems.